coming at you live from Rabbit Trails Podcast headquarters. Dual headquarters. We have dual headquarters in Sweden and Spain. Garrick, it looks like it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon here in Sweden, and it is 9:56. It is fantastic.
It is, because you guys are coming up in like 2 weeks on the longest day of the year.
Yeah, which is great. So we have 2 more weeks of getting more light every day, and then it starts decreasing. But you don't notice it for about another month and a half. So this is what we call the revenge of summer. You get the winter half year, and then you get a good, just a ton of light in the afternoon. Yeah. Actually, I woke up at 2 a.m. the other day. Maybe it was about it was about 2 a.m. And the sun comes up at 3, so it felt like it was dusk at 2 a.m. I just love it. It's glorious.
So that's St. John's Day, right? Do you guys celebrate it?
You know, we still have to. So this is an interesting thing about the Swedish Lutheran Church. We still have saints, and Luther would have had a problem with that. But the Swedish Lutheran Church still has saints, but that is not one of the saint days that we still celebrate. Yeah, so it very well could be, but I don't.
Yeah, so it's not called, but it's like midsummer. What's it? You guys? But is there a big celebration for?
Oh yeah, but it's all pagan.
It's all pagan. Stuff,
I mean, it's a giant pole that looks like like it's a phallic symbol. I mean, it's a giant pole that's sticking out of the ground with flowers, and I mean, it's a total pagan ritual that I mean, it has some Christian elements that got opted in and everything else. But to be honest, mostly it's just still mostly pagan. But the coolest thing, so in Sweden, where was it? Is it Latvia? They jump over fires.
Yeah, Estonia as well.
Okay, well in Sweden you dance around the maypole, which is funny because it's in June. But there's 2 words for it: the majstång or maypole, or the midsommarstång, the midsummer pole. So, but anyway, you dance around it, and one of the coolest things that you do is you sing music. So Swedes are a very musically talented people. So number 3 exporter of music in the world, or producer of music in the world, behind U.S. and Great Britain, which is incredible when you think about there's only 10 million people who live in this country. So music is just everything we do is music, and of course. Oh gosh, total rabbit trail here. But have you seen, there's a video going around called The Blessing, or the UK Blessing. Lots of countries, Malaysia, really cool song.
I think every country's done it by now. Spain just put one out. So. Okay,
cool. In Spanish, or do they sing in the English version?
Probably in Spanish.
Yeah. But Sweden did one. It's in Swedish. Really good, great thing. Love the initiative. Really cool. The radio station, the state radio station, every summer does a digital choir, and where they have people recording. So summer songs are a big part of Swedish culture. So songs about literally the weather and summer and everything, because you celebrate it. And so I just watched the other night this classic Swedish choral song about the summer, and I think they had 750 entries. And so it was done in that style of the UK Blessing, but they were singing this summer song, and it was absolutely gorgeous.
Very cool.
And you're just thinking to yourself, man, 700 random people doing YouTube videos that are sending in, and it's just pristine quality. So that's Sweden. But anyway, sorry. Back to the scene. So the world's largest midsummer celebration is in a town called Leksand, which means play sand. Anyway, which is in Dalarna, which is kind of north central Sweden. And it's idyllic Sweden. When people think Sweden, to be honest, a lot of times they're kind of thinking Dalarna sort of thing. It's where the little painted horses come from, all this stuff. So you go up there, and it's 10,000 people dancing around this maypole, singing. There's a Swedish song called The Small Frog. And you dance around it, and you all dance like frogs.
Well, there you go.
So it sounds so bizarre, but honestly, it's one of my favorite things. I love doing it with the kids. Anyway, you Google what would you Google? I guess Swedish midsummer dancing.
Yeah, I bet you
something
can find
like that. Yeah, it's pretty epic.
Yeah, when I lived in Estonia, I did. So there in Estonia, and probably Latvia as well, and maybe Lithuania as well. So I don't know, but it's Jaanipäev in Estonian, which means John's Day. So St. John's Day.
Okay.
So you go out into the campo, into the what's that place called? I'm thinking
field.
Spanish. The fields, yeah, out in the fields. And you would make a big bonfire, and people would jump over it, and you had like all these people made cakes, and you stayed up all night. It's a lot of fun. But I think, okay, so I've heard this. I don't know, but so that is John's Day, right? Saint John,
right?
So I think Saint John the Baptist is. I could be wrong on this. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. But so the idea there is that's the longest day of the year, because what did John say? I am going to diminish, so he can. So you're going into the calendar of he's going down until Christmas, which then is the shortest day of the year, and then from there you got the increase of Christ. So
wow, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I always love that stuff about liturgical or church calendars.
Yeah,
we have often just totally forgot, but there's that rhythm of life of like we should be thinking about John now, but John came to introduce us and prepare the way for Jesus.
Well, it's interesting because the Hillsong pastor here was talking about, so Hillsong, I believe it's in Stockholm, is doing a lot more liturgical stuff as well. So they're bringing back in some liturgy, and even the Baptist church that we go to here, it's a kind of a Baptist from beginning, Baptist in the sense of believing in adult baptism, not necessarily Southern Baptist in not believing in, dancing. Although I'm not sure there was a lot of dancing that went on. All my Southern Baptist friends, I'm joking around with you. I grew up in a Southern Baptist church for a good portion of my life. Please don't write me hate mail. Anyway, what was I saying? So yeah, but even in Sweden, I mean, even a lot of places, it seems like liturgy, which I think is a good thing, is a little bit on the rise. It's in vogue now, which is, I think, really good for the church. I know it's been good for me. There's a couple of podcasts that I listen to that kind of tap into that. I've been doing a little bit of Book of Common Prayer from the Anglican Church, which some days I'm kind of like, I'm not really sure I like that prayer, but otherwise it's really good stuff. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
What is John's Day like in Spain?
It's kind of celebrated, but it depends on Spain. Spain is the calendar is incredibly liturgical. There's always but something going on in the church calendar that then proceeds into a holiday of some sort. But it depends a little bit on what region and what province you live in. Okay. So you've always got, so for instance, right, we're getting next week or this coming week here in Granada is Corpus Christi. And so Corpus Christi is a big, big deal in Granada. Yeah. It's a 3-day holiday here. But it's not that big a deal in other places. But if you go up to Barcelona, that's, their patron saint is Saint George. So they do a big deal when it's that. So it depends. Each city, each town has their own stuff that they focus on. So it's really interesting. So I'm trying to remember if I've been in some places where St. John's Day was a big deal. I kind of feel like I have, but I don't remember this because there's always something. It feels like there's always something going on in Spain.
No, I want to say, and I'm forgetting what it was, but I think it was an episode of Somebody Feed Phil. If you're familiar with that show, off of Netflix.
Yeah.
Was it Somebody Feed Phil or was it something else? But I want to say that he was someone on some food show I was watching. Was it somewhere at the celebration of St. John's Day? But I don't remember what it was.
Yeah.
But I want to say it was in Spain. So I'm just trying to think of, there's not too many places there's tons of places that people would go in Spain. So would it be Madrid that would celebrate it?
I don't know. That's a good question. It could even be, that's a tricky thing. It is just kind of part and parcel of so sometimes you're just kind of like, oh, what's going on? Oh yeah, of course. It's another thing.
All right. So okay. Rabbit trail then. I declare a rabbit trail. Okay, so this would apply. So something that I've often wondered about Sweden. So one of the things that we do, one of the actually biggest celebrations that we have is Santa Lucia. which is saint of light in the middle of the darkness of winter. And so, she famously put candles on her head in order to care for the wounded in caves in Italy. So she's a patron saint of Italy, but Sweden has taken her because of the lights. And so choirs sing all this different stuff. And the songs that are sung, are about Christ or about the coming light, about all these things. And of course, every Swede knows them. And even though we're the most secular country in the world, or one of the most secular countries in the world, I know that everyone there's certain cultures that like to claim that. So I'm not going to fight. We're secular and largely so.
Yeah.
But I often wonder how is it, and how is it, do you think that this happens in Spain, or I assume that it does? People go through liturgy and their life is touched with things about Christ, but completely missing, not even coming close to the picture. So one example of this would be a famous grocery store commercial. They have this grocery store chain in Sweden has incredible funny commercials. Ica is the name of it. And they one day were during Easter, or just before Easter, the grocery store was saying, "Why do we eat eggs on Easter? Did Jesus?" And they go, "Did Jesus just like eggs or something?" And they were just kind of joking around about it. But that's actually a very common thing in Sweden for people not to be disconnected from the stories that they're also so familiar with. So how is it in Spain? And then the background of that is, how do you think it is that people can go through societally and just completely miss the Jesus that they're swimming in?
Yeah. Well, I think in Spain, it's a great question. And I think it's a question that needs a lot more research and questioning.
Yeah.
But I'll give you kind of a little bit of what I think. So
it's good. Otherwise, this would be a short podcast.
Yeah. So that's we should.
It's a good question. Let's move on.
Let's move on. I think you have a country in Spain that was drenched in the church for many, many years, right?
Right.
And so at some point who knows when that was, but there's a strong divide, right? Mainly modernism, so maybe 18th century, 19th century. But at some point, people want to divorce and take out the spirituality of what it is, or who Christ is and what that really means, but they don't want to give up all the good stuff, right?
Right.
So you don't want to give up the fun parties, because I think this is something that's very fascinating about Catholicism, which we miss in Protestantism, is that there's a cycle of joy, right?
Right.
Cycle of getting people together and celebrating. Sometimes getting people in mourning, because that's also Easter. Right. Easter going into the final day is time of mourning and preparation, seriousness. Ash Wednesday. Some of those things are in Anglicanism and Presbyterianism too. So I don't think they wanted to give up some of that beauty, that tradition, that art that came out of it. Now, on the flip side of that, there is also what I would call folk Catholicism or syncretism, right. Where there are still people who, think if you pray to Mary, that's going to do something. And with the New Age and all that stuff coming in too, that's mutated that into something. Well, Mary's up there with Buddha and whoever else. So it's like, if she can help me out, great. So there's some, I think that's one of the things that you have to go to still back, is that we're in this, and this is for Danny, liquid modern time of people just take and pick what they want and to believe in. And so you don't have that homogenous or monolithic belief system anymore. So it's fascinating because you can go in Spain and you can meet people who literally don't know who Jesus is. You can meet people who go, "Oh yeah, Jesus is great. I love going to church. I love participating." And you'd be like, "Oh, cool. Well, how long have you always believed in God?" "Oh, I don't believe in God, but literally you meet that. Oh, no, I don't believe in God. No, but I'm participating in this stuff because it's it has some kind of meaning to me, maybe family, to all the way down to, people who are serious about their faith, to kind of folk or mystical kind of, syncretism.
Yeah.
So you get this wide spectrum of people.
Yeah.
It's very complicated. I think that's a lot to do with it. It's just this divorce of meaning from spiritual meaning from what those things were meant to be,
and not necessarily wanting to lose tradition, some sense of trajectory and community. So they very well could be. There's a television show here called Solsidan, which it's one of the most popular, has been one of the most popular television shows. There is it's kind of this, it's a comedy, but it's kind of a drama comedy. It's a really fascinating show. And one of the characters in this show is, they're pretty outspoken atheists, not interested at all in anything religious, and they kind of make it known throughout it. But one of the storylines is this couple has children, and they decide that they want to baptize their kids. Mm-hmm. And but they're kind of having this crisis. It's a crisis of faith is what it is, because they're like, well, wait a second, well, why are we doing this? And it's kind of like this sense of, well, because we're this is what you do. And so anyway, there's this famous scene of them going to talk with the priest about wanting to baptize their kids and or christen their kids. And the guy is like, yeah, but we're not religious. Like we don't believe this. And the priest is kind of like, well, that's fine. We really don't care. And it's just this hilarious scene, because it really exposes, I think, some of the realities of Sweden. We just celebrated Christ's Ascension Day, right?
Yeah.
And
same here.
One year, Victoria and I and our teams went around and we're asking students, and it's literally called Christ Ascension Day. Like some holidays are just, it's something and you don't know the religious reason or whatever. No, it's called Christ Ascension Day. And so we would ask people, so what do you celebrate on Christ Ascension Day? And people are like, no clue. I got nothing.
Yeah.
So
I'll take us down another, a question, big question, then another rabbit trail.
All right.
Real quick. And then we actually have something we were going to talk about.
We'll get
this is good. So the question, when we've asked this before in previous podcasts, how do you reach those people, right? Because these are people who are not. So to tie into that, fascinating experience. So I like Terrence Malick films.
Yes.
Right. And so I watched Song to Song recently, which when you hear that as a Christian, you think Song to Song. It sounds like Song of Songs, right? And there's a clear tie-in to that. There's a clear tie-in. And I'll just say that for people, for some people, it will be an unwatchable film. But for
as are most of your film suggestions.
Yes. But for some people, if you can stick through it, although I've never seen a guy make a Wendy's parking lot look so beautiful. I mean, the cinematography is phenomenal. But if you stick with it, what you're getting is a walk through Lamentations, a walk through Song of Songs, a walk through wisdom literature. In these characters, and it is incredibly biblical. You have all these quotes that you're like, wait, that sounds like someone in the Bible. Well, you even have a character who represents Satan, who says things like, I rule here. I will not let you be hurt. You cannot be hurt here. I rule, or pride is a good thing. You have and he's leading these people down a horrible trail, and then finally they realize that they're going down that direction, and what they wake up to is where you find true happiness is not in the pursuit of money, wealth, fame, sex, but you find that in fidelity, in family, in love, and ultimately in God and Christ, and that's made it's very symbolic. But if you're someone who's read the Bible. Right. If you're someone who is just generally familiar with the arc of salvation history and read the Psalms, Proverbs, it's very powerful in a way, and how he points you to what is real and what is good. I mean, I've never seen a Hollywood movie where someone said, lamenting almost as a cry for help, sex a gift. Like, when has Hollywood ever said sex is a gift? He says sex a gift. I played with it. And now she's come to this conclusion that no, that was wrong. What I needed was fidelity, honesty, But it was fascinating because I was just, it's a lot's coming at you in this film. And so I was looking for reviews to kind of go, did I understand that movie?
Yeah.
And I found one review that was like, this is laid it out and said, obviously written by a Christian.
Yeah.
But most of the reviews were like, this is a really weird romantic movie.
Huh.
And missed
and they just completely
missed the entire, all the references, all the, biblical stuff that's going on there and what this was about, which is, this is wisdom literature. This is what is good. What do you follow? What are you seeking after? And I was fascinated by that so many people who are paid to review movies totally miss it. Now, well, and also that, like, you should know that's where that Malik's coming from. It's not a surprise.
Right. If you knew, if you took time to find out that part about his background.
Yeah. Or to see his other movies.
So you said, how do you reach those people? So
yeah,
part of me
we're in a society where Rolling Stone, New York Times, these people who are writing professionally for their lives can't grasp these concepts or don't have a common language of these concepts. Not everyone. Right. There's still people out there. There was obviously the one reviewer who, whoa, this is what this is, and it's
right. Yeah, they had enough cultural reference.
Yeah.
Well, so I mean that's part of it, right? So there was a time where I might have said, well, you got to do something like a Malik. I think Malik is shrewd. And Jesus tells us to be shrewd. And I don't think Christians are particularly, especially those who are trying to, let's say, I think in proclamation, we tend to not be very shrewd. We tend to, load everything we can up in our cannon and try to shoot it at once. So like a Christian movie, a quote unquote Christian movie, with a decent message decides that it has to have every Christian message in it instead of, I will never forget, I was watching, there was a movie, Safe House with Ryan Reynolds and Denzel Washington. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't particularly, I mean, it is a decent movie, nothing necessarily wrong with it. It's a CIA thriller, lots of running and shooting and blood and living through car crashes that no one would ever live through. Anyway, so there's one scene though where Denzel Washington's character is being waterboarded. Mm-hmm. There's no character has a crisis, says, I can't believe my country would do this, or, whatever else. But the movie came out, of course, during or shortly after a lot of the waterboarding issues that were going on in the U.S. And I remember watching it going, oh, that's what waterboarding is, and going, oh, that's pretty terrible. Even though I don't really like Denzel Washington's character. And so there was this point that was made. So the director of the film, and I don't know if that was their purpose, but they used a movie about something completely different. But the one thing I walked away from that was, man, I really got to think about this whole waterboarding issue.
It seems unpleasant.
Yeah, right. Doesn't seem like a walk in the park. So anyway, I think Christians should be shrewd. That's not to say we got to sneak it in, but I think we just can't try to lower the boom every line. Yeah. But then there's the other reason, the other thing, and this is where are you familiar with the podcast This American Life?
I believe I don't think I've listened to it, but I understand the concept, I believe.
So I love it. And there's a whole host of podcasts. There's one called Radio Lab. There's a bunch of other stuff, but podcasts that are similar where they're just telling story. Okay. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the show Serial, kind of similar. Okay.
Of course.
So they're just telling good stories, whereas Serial is, a whole series of stuff. This is, every episode of This American Life is different. But generally speaking, they have 3 parts of the show, 3 stories with one theme. So it can be, the effects of barbecue on the male gut. No, I'm not kidding. I'm kidding. But no, it can be something like, I don't know.
I would like to listen to that.
Love in the time. What makes us love in the time of COVID, internet or something like that. And they'll just do 3 stories exploring that from very different angles. And they rarely come to any kind of conclusion or agenda. Sometimes they do, but it's always powerful and gripping. Okay. I personally think that for the happy pagan, one thing that we tend to do is our first approach tends to be, hey, aren't you miserable? Jesus died for your misery. And the happy pagan is kind of going, no, I'm not really miserable. I'm mostly miserable because you're talking to me right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And so, well, Paul's approach in Acts in certain places is God who has given us good food to eat and good drink to drink. His approach is, his first leg in is happiness. So I think in some sense for those who are in the happy pagan scenario, who are just like, well, I just kind of like this stuff. I think part of it is just pointing out a worldview that says, okay, this is a worldview that says God has given us feasts to enjoy.
Yeah.
What do the feasts point towards? Like, I was reading today there's a Japanese theologian that I read, and he was talking about certain Japanese practices that led toward, well, first of all, he was bringing up, what is it? Marduk. Was it Marduk or Moloch? One of the gods that you sacrifice humans to.
Yeah.
And then he was talking about them in the Old Testament, but then he made the analogy that in the lead up to World War II, Japan had gone off the rails by making the emperor so powerful that we would sacrifice everything to him, and they made him godlike, but they distorted the goodness of all this, and so they went off the rails. Long-winded reply here, but I really do think that one should say, the person who says, well, all religions have feasts. That's great. What are you feasting to? Yeah. Are you feasting to a God who, if you don't, is going to kill you? Or are you feasting to a God who has killed him, who has offered his son?
Yeah.
Those are different gods. So I think there's entry points, right? I think we can use the markers that are around us for discussion.
Yeah. And I think too, you're pointing in story, you're pointing people towards maybe meaning and beauty, things that can point us to something, and maybe they're not definitive, right? Because you're right. And I think this might be a good segue into the movie that we both were able to watch, because it is an incredibly powerful story.
Yeah.
And it points to beauty. It points to perseverance. It points to strength, courage, life change, all the things that we want to see. And I think people in the world want to see, if I can say anything about Terrence Malick's movie Song to Song, he's saying something very countercultural there, but he's also saying something that a lot of people want to hear, that it is worthwhile to find love in God and in a mate, and to be faithful and to build a life there. Whereas what the world is sometimes saying is, just go do whatever you want. You don't need kids. You don't need a wife. You don't need a husband. You don't need those things to be happy. And granted, those things don't guarantee you happiness, but that's what God has kind of laid out as your the way forward. I would say, maybe, and when I say family and marriage, I'm not necessarily saying that, but I think faithfulness to something was probably the message there. Faithfulness to something, and not just running around, doing whatever you want. And that maybe also comes back to this story of these guys, this movie. But let's talk about the movie.
Let's launch into it. So our listenership, the broad swath of humanity that it is well aware of the fact that you and I have a small fascination with the Camino de Santiago in northern Spain, the pilgrimage trail network that runs all over Spain, Portugal, and France, leading to Santiago de Compostela, and where the supposed bones of Saint James are buried, and which people through the Middle Ages made pilgrimages to, of which has been resurrected or revived, rather, in recent history. And so I've been doing a lot of research lately, watching tons of documentaries, or not tons, but a few documentaries, slight exaggeration on my part there. Listening to podcasts, reading on the Camino, and came across this one documentary called I'll Push You. And for anyone out there, I cannot recommend this documentary enough. Spoiler alert in this, if you're one of those people who wants to see the end before you hear us talk about it, turn this podcast off, go to Amazon, buy the movie, because you can't rent it or anything else. You got to buy it, but it will be the best money you've spent in a long while. Watch it and then come back and we'll talk about it. Okay. So I'm gonna pause there to let you turn it off.
This is no, I don't recommend things like, for instance, I like Terrence Malick, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend that everyone go out and watch his movies.
Yeah.
But I think he's doing amazing work. But there's one album that I would say if you don't have U2 Joshua Tree, you also should stop, go out and buy that album or download it right now. Like, you should have that. But then I would say this movie, like, if you could rent it, great. If you could get it free, great. But this movie is worthwhile buying, spending the money.
Yeah.
It was a well-made movie, and it's powerful on so many levels. And if you're someone who's interested someday in doing the Camino, this is probably the best apologetic.
Yeah, it'll just get you going. So the story is Justin Skisuck and Patrick Gray, friends from very early on in their life, 36 hours apart, and they were essentially very good friends, best friends growing up. Justin contracted or has a very rare nerve disease or autoimmune disease that attacks his nerves. It basically makes it look like he has ALS. So he essentially he's quadriplegic. Essentially has to have someone feed him, and his friend, and he was watching Rick Steves Europe and saw a story on Camino de Santiago, and so he just makes a comment to his wife, what if I could go do the Camino, which is crazy on the surface, right? It's trails, a guy in a wheelchair. How on earth is he going to do it?
It's crazy without the wheelchair.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, so his buddy mentions it to Patrick, and Patrick's response is, "I'll push you." And so this embarks them on their 500-mile, 840-kilometer journey from the French border in French Basque Country, taking the Camino Frances to Santiago de Compostela. And so there was a point in the movie. I'll share a little bit of my reaction before we maybe even get to some of the highlights. But there was a point in the movie where first of all, I watched the trailer, and I was just like, emotional. The trailer. I was just like, it was just incredible.
The trailer, just go watch the trailer.
Yeah. And if you're not moved as a human, please seek professional help. So someone's going to write me like, I wasn't moved at all. What's your problem? So anyway, so watch this thing. And there was a point in the movie though, where I was kind of like, I was thinking it was going to be about Justin's journey, the guy in the wheelchair. And it wasn't, it sort of was, but it wasn't gripping me. Right. It wasn't that the movie at that point wasn't good. It was good. It had just turned into something different. Did you feel that way?
Yeah. There was a point where as the more I think about it, there was an intentional effort, and that part of it because I think in the post of what happened, the real change happened to the other guy.
Yeah,
Patrick. Yeah. Patrick's life was turned upside down, and he had to come to grips with all that. And so I think even from the very beginning, because in the very beginning they've got an extra helper, right? And they're very clear to make it show how he's helping, and they're very clear for him when he leaves, the guy who comes just to help for 2 weeks, to say, I don't know if he's going to be able to do this. And this guy also is a little bit too tightly wound. And I'm worried he's going to push himself too far.
Yeah.
Because he wants to do this for his friend, and he's an achiever. He's got to do it.
Yeah.
And so at that point they're setting the stage, and they do it very subtly, but you see over time, this guy have to come to deal with some stuff in his life. That was.
Yeah. So if you've ever seen the movie, The Way, And if you're familiar at all with the Camino de Santiago, there's a point in, is it the halfway point, or is it a little over halfway? Do you know
which place
where the Iron Cross is?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit further
because it's after the Meseta, so it's after
Meseta, so
it's after the desert.
It's more than halfway. You're probably a fourth left.
Okay, so 3/4 of the way
more
through.
Or less.
So there's this point where they have this giant. I mean, there's crosses all set up along the way for you to leave stones. So you walk with a stone, a burden, something you've been thinking about, pondering, and you want to give up to the Lord. Like, you lay your burden down, the burden that you've been carrying. And but the most common one, or the kind of the big one that everyone does, is of course this Iron Cross. And it's this massive cross on a pole, or not massive, it's a very simple cross, but on a really large pole.
Yeah, it's very tall.
Where people leave their stones. And it's just piles and piles and piles of stones from people who have set down burdens. And it's a beautiful thing. I don't think it's any. So one of the cool things about it was I realized that it was after the Meseta, where you're just walking mostly flat, dry, deserty land.
Yeah, it's the hard, and people will talk about the hardest part, because it's so hot. You don't have any tree cover,
right?
And it just feels like you're going on and on and on.
Right, and that's where I think I realized. I think that's what was cool, is when Patrick decides to put down his stone there. I realized that, the people who created and who eventually, one of the cool things about the Camino is that a lot of the kinks of it were worked out over thousands of years, right? So it's something that's been going on for a long time. So it's not like, oh man, we got to think through this. This really doesn't work. It's kind of like, no, that cross is there after the Meseta because people come to the end of themselves. And they're ready to lay that burden down, and then you have the more joyful entry into Santiago. There's like someone thought through that. And so sure enough, Patrick lays down, I resonated with it, and I've shared this a lot on the podcast, but he in the movie talks about that he had taken on a job which was really stressful, and he just didn't like who he was to his wife and kids. And man, I'm sitting there listening to that, and I'm fighting back, just sobbing, because I was like, man, that is in a lot of ways kind of my story, and thankful to be on this side of it. But I was just like, man, I connected with that so much. And so when he laid down for him, he stepped out of his job. I'm not stepping out of my job. But he lays that down, and that was just such a powerful. And so at that point, that's when I don't want to say it was a climax, but it was a point at which you realized, oh man, this is a story about this guy. And so you brought up the question of who's pushing who.
Yeah. Yeah, that was, and I don't know if that was intentional, but there was that is really who carried who.
Right.
But who pushed who, and in some sense, Justin, but in a lot of ways, and the community that came around him, because they were also very careful to show the times that Patrick would reject help, where he said, or he would kind of like, I don't need it, or even other people saying, hey, we want to help, and him learning that no, it's all right. I think for both of them, realize that there's a community of people, there's love out there that can come along. And I think that was also hard for him.
Well,
I need help.
I think Justin had realized that a long time before, because he used to say, part of it, he even said, you hate to be a burden to people. But then he said, but I've had to realize I can't rob them from the joy of service.
Yeah.
And man, that is a powerful idea. I've often linked that with the gospel. So that idea, right? So Jesus, which is harder, for the woman to cry on Jesus's feet and wash them with her tears, or for Jesus to receive that?
Yeah.
Which takes more humility? And it's actually the receiver. It's actually Jesus who says, I'll let you do this, because shame wants to go, ugh. Shame wants to pull away, right? And Jesus just leans into it, and he says, "Blessed are you."
Yeah.
And I think Justin had learned that by virtue of his disease and his journey. And of course, he's human, so he struggles with it, right? He doesn't want to see his friend struggling or anything else. but he realized you can't steal that joy from people because they want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a real problem allowing people to help me. I mean, I felt like I kept going through that film going, I am Patrick.
I think it's a common American male, maybe just male in general issue, that we do have trouble asking for help and being vulnerable for multiple reasons. I'm not a psychologist or a sociologist, although I dabble in sociology here and there. I'm a dabbler.
Stayed at a Holiday Inn last night.
But yeah, it seems that we as guys, as men, especially even in ministry, have a really hard time being vulnerable and open. And it reminds me, you read a lot of great books about leadership, and they always talk about being vulnerable as a leader, being humble as a leader, and those are really hard things to do, I think.
I don't know about you. So wow, I feel like this is turning into like I feel like I'm talking to my counselor here. But so sorry, side point here. Someone was talking about the differences, which is a good development, but the differences between, like, say 20 years ago and now. So like 20 years ago, it would be like if someone was seeing a counselor, it's like, hey, did you hear that so-and-so is seeing a counselor? Now today it's on Twitter. It's, you're never going to believe what I told my counselor today. It's a badge of honor. But anyway, so for me, I'm an Enneagram 8. I have a hard time, to be honest, trusting much of anyone. I think I may do it better than a lot of 8s, but I think deep down I struggle with that. So I know that that's a battle that I have. And I want to be self-sufficient in all things. So that's kind of a little bit of my own battle, but I'm transparent. So I'll be honest with you about what I'm thinking, feeling, whatever, probably maybe even too honest. But I'm not necessarily vulnerable. And it's something that I want to work hard on. I do work hard on trying to be vulnerable, especially with people that I trust, or our listenership. I tend to just open up to you guys, but that's part of that transparency. But anyway, so the point being is, vulnerability is actually really hard. And Steve Cuss, who wrote that book, Managing Leadership Anxiety, can't recommend that book enough to people either. He would say that he considers his definition of leadership is vulnerability. So he would go so far as to say, in general, in order to be a good leader, or in order to lead, you must choose to be vulnerable. Now, I'm not sure how to parse that out in the sense of, you can't be vulnerable with everybody. Like you can't,
you gotta,
you can't get the president of Crew or, large organizations getting up there and going, I need your help. So I'm not necessarily that fully works, but I think I'm starting to understand what Steve Cuss means by that. And that's actually Justin in that story, or in that movie. He seemed to have quite a bit of vulnerability. I think by virtue of probably something that he learned, because I can't imagine going through all of that.
No, he was that's just an incredibly difficult situation, because he started to have that issue when he was 25.
Yeah, that's crazy. I can't imagine going through that. But an incredible person, and what character. Here's another point of this, right? My son's 9 years old. He'll be 10. We were talking today about how character is built through adversity or difficulty. And I often look at guys like Justin and I'm like, man, I want to be like that. And then I realize, that's maybe not what my heart of heart wants. But there is a reality that the character is built through adversity, and through humbling yourself. And he has spades of it. Another cool thing that happened in that, and we don't have to belabor this movie, but so shortly after that scene, they're going to make another ascent. So they made the ascent up into
And the Pyrenees. They went over the Pyrenees from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port.
Yeah, which was crazy. But then there's another ascent into, what is the name of it?
O Sobrero. O Sobrero. That's how you would say it in Galician.
Really, it sounds Italian.
It does. They have the kind of a sing-song.
Really? Oh, that's kind of
cool. And that's going up into Galicia. This is the last part.
That's the last 125.
There's this mountain range. So you've come out across the Meseta in Castilla y León, which is pretty flat.
Yeah.
And now to get into Galicia, because Galicia has kind of always been walled off because of these mountains. You got to go up the mountains. They're not huge mountains.
Yeah.
But they're mountains, and you've got to get up them, and then as you know from there, because from Osobrero, the next one is Chiacastella, where you've walked from.
Yeah,
so then
right.
you're going generally downhill with some ups and downs, but you're generally going down towards the sea to get to Santiago.
So I thought, to me, and I pretty much lost it when this point came, but because they had a friend join them for the last part to help them get up the mountains, and they come into this town before the ascent, and there's a group of people waiting for them at lunch. And this group of people, it must have been 10 or 15 people.
Yeah.
Just basically end up carrying Justin in some parts. But also what I noticed, and this was, I think, the coolest part, which must have been incredibly difficult for Patrick, they carried his pack.
Yeah. He was able to, because he was getting to the end of his physical rope.
Yeah, he was done.
He had pushed his friend. I mean, that's insane. He'd pushed his friend from France all the way across the northern part of Spain.
Well, who hasn't done that, though?
Yeah, and he was in good shape, but still, that is. I mean, he was. You and I, after 5 days of walking, were pretty worn out.
Yeah,
we had to carry our own backpack.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's because we're middle-aged, not out of shape. But who's pointing that out? Anyway, that to me was just a powerful, and it shows, I think, one, that we all need people, but two, the beauty of community.
Yeah.
This community of people who had seen them along the way, who had talked with them, laughed with them, all this stuff, and just says, we're going to do this. And that is such a powerful message.
Yeah.
So I just,
It was something we learned, something I had studied and understood in my research, but something we learned when we walked the Camino. And it was something very much that, remember, Ty, one of the guys who's works in Austin as a firefighter, shared. He had kind of had, and I think you did too, and I did. We all kind of came into that Camino experience thinking, "Oh, this is really going to be about me getting alone, having some time to think and process." And what we found out was, and I think Ty says this: don't go with that attitude. Go with the attitude that you're going to go and be a part of a community. Mm-hmm. Go with a community. I think if you start in France, it's a lot easier to make a community as you come across.
Yeah,
you spend a month walking with people. It's a little bit harder towards the end because everyone is kind of just, it's the last bit. You don't have time to make those formation. Although you get a little bit of that. But if you go as a group, you have that opportunity. So I think it continues to hit hard to me. Number one, the importance of community, the importance that we're made for community, essentially. And thirdly, the idea that, oh my gosh, I just totally lost my train of thought there. But
you got a text message.
Yeah, someone sent a text that popped up. But I think that the Camino is about community. That pilgrimage is about community.
Yeah, I think that's what struck me is community. Yeah. Pilgrimage is about community. So one of the things, so this goes back into, and you and I have talked about, we want to talk really at length about Stefan Pass, and he's written a great book, two great books, but one that I'm finishing up now, Pilgrims and Priests. And it's kind of his idea of, in a secular, postmodern, liquid, modern society, how do you reach and how do you minister to this age? The gospel of Jesus Christ. And so one of his primary, and he takes it actually from Peter, First Peter, but it is that of being an exile and a pilgrim, and also a priest. And so he really develops that. And I the more I think on it, the more I look at things like the Camino. So one of the purposes, of course, of pilgrimage is that you leave your community, discover a new community, and become a different person, and then reconnect into your old community upon returning. And I actually think so. I think that was one of the really neat things that I saw in this film, as opposed to some of the others, is there's not a reconnecting into the community in a lot of films with complete life change. It's, I'm going to go back and I'm going to be a different person, but you don't necessarily see someone doing something completely different. And in this case, these guys just, it completely changed their life. And they Patrick left his job to become a different person. And
his family more.
To be with his family more. Left a high paying, really successful job. But I do think that is one of it's not just community, because I see a lot of community in non-Christian settings. So it can't be just about community, but they're signposts, right? So it's the job of the Christian pilgrim to come alongside and say, do you know what made who made our desire for that community? Do you know what this is pointing us to? It's that person who can come alongside and journey with and pilgrim with and help a person understand kind of what they're looking at, so to speak.
And I think that's what, getting back to a little bit where we were talking about in the beginning of, how do we connect these things? So you look at this story of these two guys, and I think anyone who would watch it would be like, gosh, I would love to have a friend like that. I would love to have an experience like that. And so for me, I look at it and I go, in some sense, there's nothing essentially Christian about that, right? Now these guys are believers. Prayer is a part of their life. They've got different values that they're trying to move themselves to. But I think the fact that we're living more and more in a society where friendships are not very strong, where families are not very strong, where meaning is sometimes not is lacking. Now, I think we're a little bit in a transitional time. That's still that bit of that stays there, but you can meet people who've lost all that, who don't have that anymore. And so I think on one hand, we're trying to help people who've lost all that sense of, like, Bono sings, I feel like I'm drifting out from the shore. I think there's a society that's more and more, it feels like it's drifting out to the shore, and it's looking for that meaning, looking for purpose, looking for friendship, like real friendship. And sometimes the church fails in those areas. Sometimes we fail in those areas, but that's ultimately, I think, as you were saying, the stories, the beauty, the values we can point people to. That's what is found, in what God calls, is calling us to do, human flourishing and following Christ. And so I think I think that's maybe where we need to go. How do we help people connect into that and say, no, this is good for you?
Well, I think it has to be. So here's one of the things, right? So if your primary worldview is, if you're not a Christian, you're miserable and there's no meaning, and no other worldview has any kind of meaning, right? So then if you go on a Buddhist pilgrimage and you find people who have meaning, you have a crisis of worldview, right? If you think that every person who is unmarried but is living together with kids is completely without meaning and that their life is terrible, but then all of a sudden you find that, no, actually they have a pretty good relationship and they seem to be working on things, and wait a second, all the Christians fight a whole lot and don't seem to have as much of peace. All of a sudden you're going to do some deconstructing, to be honest. And if you don't have a grounding that's made on something proper, you're going to deconstruct to the point where you're going to completely leave the faith, which you and I have talked about. We even talked about when we were talking about beginning this podcast, calling it reconstructing faith, because we're seeing so many people deconstruct their faith. And granted, every person needs to deconstruct things about what they believe about God, because we all believe things that are wrong. But the point here is this: if we're pilgriming in life, and if we're on the trail of our pilgrimage or whatever else, and someone happens to be enjoying or doing something and finding meaning and purpose, we don't have to be afraid of that.
Yeah.
We can rather say, hey, we're going to a city, and what you're experiencing right now is it is a product of the person who has created that city, or it is the definition of, he is the one who has given us that. So in essence, in some sense, it's like, the only people who can enjoy, let's say, good Coke is a person who comes from Atlanta, Georgia, because that's where Coca-Cola is located. And then all of a sudden you travel outside and you realize, well, wait a second, lots of people enjoy Coke. You can't have a crisis of faith at that point. You just have to say, but I know where it's made. Come and follow me, because I know the source of that. And I think that's what we lose a lot. And I think this is a little bit of the crisis of evangelism in the West. Mm-hmm. We assume too often that people who don't agree with us or don't have the same worldview of us should be a certain way. And then when we find they're not a certain way, we have a crisis of faith, or we don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And there's happy pagans, and that's an okay thing. Broken clocks can be wrong twice a day. Yeah. We don't need to be disturbed by that.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And I think what I would say then is we have two prongs, because I'm wondering, because you're right, you're going to have happy pagans. You're going to have, we don't want to create this world where it's us versus them either, which sometimes that kind of happens. But what I do think is you may see more and more is that as we become societies that are less and less Christian, you will see, these, the United Kingdom has a minister of loneliness, right? Because they see.
Do they really?
Yeah. They someone who helped, because you're seeing. So I think you have two things. You have the people who were able to kind of retain some of those values, like, build a family, whether you get married or not, but you build a family, you build solid structures that will last. So that's still going on in where we are. But then you see this other group of people, those structures have either melted or disappeared, and so they don't have them anymore. And they don't know where to go. And so I think we've got to come at it maybe with a dual approach, that we're not shocked by the incredibly loving, kind, just, pagan who actually is trying to help his neighbor and do the right thing. That shouldn't shock us. Or even, if they were Muslim or Jewish or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But so we need to be dealing with that and not be shocked by that, and loving those people and helping those people find Jesus. But then we've also got to be realized there's this other world too, where there are people who need to see, they need to see the Jason, the life transformation. You see that, wow, God did something here powerful. So I'm interested in those two things.
Yeah.
That are going on.
Do you know who Sam Alberry is? He's a
sure.
Anglican priest,
of course.
Same-sex attracted. So I listened to an interview with him the other day, and he made such an amazing point. So one of the things that he said is, too often within the church, we focus too much on maybe the family, right? So then the person who is falls outside of that. So you could just be bad luck. You didn't find someone to get married to. It could be same-sex attracted. It could be any number of reasons, right? Then that person can't be quote unquote self-fulfilled or whatever else under that definition. In the same way, a person who might be any kind of sexually attracted to anything in an improper way, or if sex becomes the arbiter of what is happiness, which is where our world is today, then that person can never find self-actualization or whatever else. And Sam Alberry's point is, the only thing that can give us true intimacy is found in the gospel. And so what he would say is, in order to be a proper human being, you need true intimacy. And the only way to get true intimacy is with the God of the universe, who stepped into humanity, right? And so then he takes it to this beautiful, just rich, awesome. And that's the point. And I think Tim Keller is really good at doing this.
Yeah,
who, by the way, I don't know if you knew this. I found out today he has pancreatic cancer.
Oh no, I did not know that.
Not good, man. I was bummed when I heard that. So we would be praying for Tim Keller. But anyway, sorry. but I think that is one of the points of one of the jobs of us as pilgrims, is to be on the way developing an intimacy with God, who, when people say, I just want to have peace in my life.
Yeah.
We don't go, well, you can't have peace because you're not a Christian.
Yeah.
We go, that's awesome. I agree. Let me tell you about the deepest peace. Yeah. There's a huge difference between those two approaches.
I totally agree. And I think it was when you get to the idea of a pilgrim.
Yeah.
Pilgrim, and when you do pilgrimage, you journey alongside people. You enter into their space, their time, and you're going together.
Right.
It's the idea of going together, not and even in the culture of the hospitalero, the person who serves the pilgrims, right? Mm-hmm. It's to be there to serve, to help, to be hospitable, not to preach,
force,
not to throw things, not to but
don't get out your gospel bullets, shoot them with the gospel bullets.
And I always, whenever we have friends, churches, students come and work in the house, I always say, sometimes we make ministry in a post-Christian, postmodern world incredibly complicated. We think it's all this stuff, when really it is, can you invite your friend, your neighbor to sit down and have a meal together?
Yeah.
And to serve them, to listen to them, yes, to share your story and to talk to them, and to invite them to church, invite them to things, share them information, to be vulnerable who you are, but not to have this, they're not projects. They're not something I got to get through. They're not a
task
people.
And they're not something to be overcome.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting principle I learned a long time ago. There's two places, and I'm going to add a third in this. And so maybe this would be a principle of pilgrimage, but there's something fascinating that happens when you don't have to have alcohol, although I think sometimes alcohol loosens people's lips, but you can be sitting at a bar, and I think the principle of it is that people will open up to you if they don't have to look at you.
Interesting.
So there's something really threatening that if I sit across from you, most people and I'm looking you straight in the eyes, which I think that there's a time and a place for that, and really good. Most people that you first meet, I'm talking mostly strangers, will not just open up to you. But at bars, for some reason, a lot of times, if you're just looking, if you can have a break, so you're both facing the same direction, and you'll look at each other, but it's not threatening to look straight ahead either. People will open up to you in some incredible ways. And I've had that happen whenever I travel at airports or different places and striking. And I'm not this is not turning into I was on an airplane and led 70 people to Jesus moment.
Yeah.
That has never happened to me, but I've had great conversations, a handful of them. And then the other place would be a campfire. You can sit down at a campfire with someone you don't know, and they will open up like crazy. And I think the third that I would add to that is the idea of walking next to someone, because it happened on the Camino. That you're talking to people. So I think in part it is the journeying with. In a campfire, you're both staring in the same direction. There's something that you're distracting. You're doing the same thing. A bar is the same principle, and the pilgrimage would be the same principle. It's always fascinating to me the way that is. We should write a book about that.
Yeah. I mean, well, and that's been our experience on the Camino. That's been, even in that. The movie I'll Push You, that's their experience. This opportunity to walk along, have someone just come up alongside you for a few minutes, and talk for 20 minutes, and then move on, and then maybe you bump into those people again. From a Christian announcing the good news, it requires something that we often leave out, which is a tremendous faith that the Holy Spirit is working in people's lives, and that you can come along and God can use you, as is Peter with the eunuch, right? How long were they together? How long? He just, granted there was some serious supernatural stuff going there. He pops, he just shows up, and
Philip.
Philip. Sorry, yes, Philip.
I just want to make sure
Peter would not.
You know that,
yes,
and you're biblical. You're not biblically illiterate.
No, Philip. Yes, but the fact that he just talked to the guy for, an hour,
Yeah.
2,
Who knows?
20 minutes, who knows? And then off you go. And this guy is, to some degree, of course, not on his own, because he has God, he has the Holy Spirit who can. But sometimes we cheapen maybe. I think that's another area of the pilgrimage where you have to sit down and trust that your interactions with somebody have to be natural, have to be kind, have to be full of love and genuine interest, but also have to trust that God is working in people's lives and that maybe we'll never see this person again this side of heaven.
Oh man. Well, so that is that's not a rabbit trail. We could do a whole series of podcasts on this.
A bear cave.
But it's also, it is also a dangerous, I don't want to say dangerous, but it's a difficult place to, difficult. I don't want to, it's in some sense a minefield to go there, not because we would get in trouble but I think it's an area that we have a hard time recognizing, specifically in the West. But in this idea of strategic missions. Mm-hmm. So I don't think there's anything wrong with being strategic. I love being strategic. But
it's one of my top skills.
Yeah. But I do think we take the role in being strategic and in being trying to maximize and reach as many people as possible and being good stewards. Yeah. All of those things, I think sometimes we forget that the Holy Spirit is at work.
Yeah.
And needs to be at work and will be at work. And so I think I know that I try to design things where I can control the outcome, which is idolatry, interestingly enough. Doing something in order to control the gods in order to get a desired result is idolatry. It is the definition of idolatry. And so we have to be very careful, and I'm not saying strategic plans are idolatry. Okay, but I am saying we need to let me apply it to myself. I'm learning again the incredible important role that the Holy Spirit plays in bringing people to Christ. Mm-hmm. And that I have to be willing to let go of results, that I have to be willing to let go of, well, what if, by all means, if I can continue the conversation, do so. But that's not always going to be the case, and that's okay. I wonder how many people Paul talked to, because, on his missionary journeys, right? He walked most of it, thousands and thousands of miles and kilometers. Along the way in between the cities, when he's walking from Thessaloniki to Corinth, who is he talking to? And what was he talking about, right? He was pilgriming.
Yeah, it's a Mediterranean culture. There was a lot of talking.
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. And I think, would have been, it's fascinating stories we get to hear someday. But because he was one of these guys who, you didn't talk to him and like, well, what's your story? Oh, well, see, I was this guy. I was there when I was killing these guys, right? And then I had a vision, and so most people are like, this guy's nuts, right? Well, holy cow, I need to figure out,
right?
Or maybe he was just like a really shy guy, and they're like, hey, what's your deal? Well, no one, but he was not a shy guy. He was an incredibly bold person, but he had a story, and I think probably all the early Christians who had seen Jesus resurrected. In some sense, I always like that verse where it says, "Blessed are those who haven't seen,"
right?
But still believe, because you're like, it's a little bit harder because I can't imagine that I would have any qualms or fear about evangelism when I had just seen a guy die, come back to life, and then ascend into heaven.
Right.
And which then, you go back to the apologetic of these guys obviously believed something because, most people who
radically different people.
I believe this stuff, but I'm probably not going to go and do a lot of what they did because, I'm probably just not, I don't know, that I think having seen that, and I've seen God work and you see God do great things in your life and other people's lives, but I cannot imagine how mind-blowing that had to be for people to go through that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think the disciples on the road to Emmaus, did our hearts not burn within us when he spoke?
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, a pilgrimage, right? I mean, they're journeying somewhere, and it wasn't a pilgrimage in the sense of a classical pilgrimage, but it was a pilgrimage. Some of my favorite psalms are the Psalms of Ascent, which are
pilgrim
psalms sung in a pilgrimage. Jesus is a big deal. He's kind of, I just lose sight of that so often.
It's so easy.
Yeah. In all the planning and all the thinking and all the everything, I just kind of lose sight of, no, he's a really big deal.
Yeah.
And I think the more we make a big deal of Jesus, and not in a I don't know, there's a winsome way to do it, and there's a winsome, true, I've experienced this guy way to do it, and then there's the annoying way to do it, and maybe there's a little bit of overlap. But I think, the talking about the realities of Jesus is always an important thing, and you can never go wrong.
And and Pos takes us to task on the strategery, the modernist perception that if we do A, B, and C, then D will happen.
Right.
He takes us to task on that.
Right.
It does a great job of it in showing. And I don't think he would say you shouldn't plan, you shouldn't have strategy, but what he's saying is somewhere in the modern world, we have become masters of our plan, that and so we've taken some of the mystery out of following Jesus in some sense.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that is helpful that Pos tends to, I think, try to point out is the faulty reasoning that proclamation of Christ will always result in an ever-increasing territory of Christians, or an ever-increasing number. And he takes that he really challenges that, takes it to task by kind of saying, is that really the case? And is that what the church is always called to in all times and places? Now, he would applaud increase in, membership and growth of the church. But I think his point is, no, the church is there for faithfulness and to be a signpost of things to come, a foretaste of the kingdom to come.
Yeah.
And I think for me as an American, oftentimes I can think to myself that I am, rather than being a missionary, I am the chief executive of the marketing department. And that my sole job is to increase traffic to the website, number of people who are, on the rolls and everything else. And while you always want to see that happen, or you would like to see that happen.
Yeah, of course.
I don't know that that's the role of the church and the Christian, all things being equal. I think our primary role is to simply declare the glories of Christ and his kingdom to come, to remain faithful, to look at the cloud of witnesses that Hebrews mentions, and to go, it's worth it. Even if no, how many people go and walk the Camino? It's several 100,000 people. For those listening at home, Garrick just yawned. I've now reached being boring.
You're not boring at all. I just yawned because
I'm a little insecure. No, I'm kidding. So I actually did it earlier, man. I just didn't make as much noise. It's late here, people.
It's 11:10.
Okay, so not late for a Spaniard, late for a Swede. Anyway,
but it's late-ish.
Yeah. So anyway, all that, I don't even remember where I was. The point being,
hundreds of thousands.
You get a couple 100,000 people, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not the world, right? And numbers are increasing. It's great. But is the point of pilgrimage to get everyone else to go on pilgrimage? No, yeah. The point of pilgrimage is to get a taste of something different and to be changed by that. And obviously you want to change others. So I don't know, maybe I'm stretching that analogy a little bit too thin, but PAS really does take to task that idea of it's not necessarily ever increasing numbers, but rather a foretaste of the kingdom to come.
Yeah. And so then maybe what he would say, and maybe I would suggest, is that the situation that we're in certain parts of the world is not a curse. It's not. It's certainly something to lament, right? In some ways, but it's part of the plan. It's not something we have to look at and go, if I don't get more people through the door, if I don't get more people knowing Jesus, we're going to work at that. That's our goal. Maybe we need to change some of our plans, but my goal is not necessarily to do that. And I can be happy and I can be excited about where God has me right now in this part of human history, in this place, and I can rejoice in the things I do see and trust that is good. So maybe instead of, we don't need to be lamenting or worrying or fearful, but what we need to be is hopeful and joyful, and to be pilgrims in the midst of a very different situation where we are exiles. We are not in our home, but we're going to our home. We're going to get to Santiago. So I think we need, in some sense, a switch, of our mentality, to flip the switch, to go back to, when you would see the early missionaries going out and their passion, their excitement, going into places that were completely dark, completely unknown in some sense, but the fact that they were going out to do that, but to go forth with adventure, with hope, with realistic expectations, certainly, some of us might not make it.
Yeah. So this attitude that we're talking about is the only one that works both ways.
Yeah.
So the attitude that it's always increasing, you can't be a successful missionary unless you're seeing the numbers that you would like to see. But if your goal is living faithfully and giving people around you a foretaste of what the kingdom is, and remaining faithful to Jesus and proclaiming him, but rejoicing at whatever fruit is given, that works both ways. If you're seeing thousands come to Christ every day, or if you're seeing 1,000 come in 1,000 years, that's the only one that works both ways. Otherwise, you've got a failure of philosophy, and the only not just a failure of philosophy, but the God that you're basing those promises on, right?
Yeah.
So if the goal, and we're assuming that any goals that we're trying to achieve is based upon the faithful promises of God, if your goal is that thousands would come, or this, that, and the other thing, when that doesn't happen, you have to go back and you have to deconstruct that God.
Yeah.
You constantly have to do that, or you have to say, okay, you start looking for things that are outside of God to explain it. Well, we didn't try hard enough, or we didn't do it the right way, or this, that, and the other thing. And that doesn't mean that you don't try to be a good practitioner. We obviously need to try to become good practitioners, but there has to be something that undergirds, that works in both scenarios. Otherwise, I don't know how to make sense of it. So watch I'll Push You, because
it's incredible.
It's awesome.
I mean, I really can't recommend it enough. We bought it because you had to buy it, and I am thankful that we bought it, because the Camino is such a part of our life.
Yeah,
we'll watch it. We'll watch it again. I will show it to people. We might even use it. We might show it to students before we go on the Camino. Because I think it's just so powerful.
Yeah, it's good. It's good stuff, man. It is absolutely good stuff. Deep breath. Garrick, we've done 11 podcasts. This is number 11.
We've broken the
unprecedented. this our 11th podcast. It's completely unprecedented. We've never done 11 podcasts.
Here's to 20 because we've got we got more ideas. We've got. I think it would be interesting to try to get even someone on who maybe would disagree with some things, because you and I agree on a lot.
Yeah,
might be good to have someone who.
Has it become an echo chamber?
No, I don't think so. I think I don't know if we agree on everything. I just think we're just really good at talking through things.
Around an issue,
and giving it a fully orbed.
That was anytime you use orb in a podcast, that's the real low point of the podcast.
It is the real low point. Yes.
All right, man. Well, let's wrap this up to a close. We're gonna shut down the world headquarters of Rapid Trails Podcast. Garrick, it is always a pleasure.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, man. I hope you have a good rest of your evening, and we'll catch you on the next one, man.
All right.
See you on the flip side.